Okay, dear colleagues who are joining our day 2 back to school conference, hello, hello. Please find the chat box and in some way note that you see us, that you hear us, and if it is possible for you, type please where you come from, where you are connecting to this webinar, what place you are connecting to us. Okay, I see pluses. It's hello from Odessa, Yulia. Thank you. Uzhgorod, Kharkiv, Cherkasy, Kalush, Lutsk, Lviv, Kharkiv. Okay, we have now, it's 1 minute before the start, and we now already have most of the regions of the country present, and people are still joining. It's 3 p.m. And we're ready to start, not to waste anyone's time. Hello again to everyone who is joining us live. Hello to everyone who will be watching this session in the recording format. I'm Inna Nistaiter and I work for Macmillan Education Ukraine. Today is day 2 and we're talking about teenagers, not we, but our very special guest, Dave Spencer, who is known to you and who is the author of our bestseller, Gateway to the World. Before I give you to Dave, 2 small reminders. First, the conference is being recorded, so you will be able to watch it as many times as you wish. I will send you the recording. The second thing, of course, you will receive the certificate, but as I'm in Ukraine, and to be more specific, in the suburbs of Kyiv, I do have power cuts, so you will receive the certificate, but not today. And the third thing, let's hope that we're all safe. In case it is an air raid signal, please make sure you are in the safe place. So now, Dave, all the audience is yours. I'm happy to give them to you.
Thank you very much, Inna. Thank you. I hope you can all hear me. If you can't hear me, let me know. I'm just going to try and get I'm trying to find my presentation here for a second. Hopefully I'll be able to find it in a second. Wait, why can't I find my presentation? Just 2 seconds. Sorry, I'm just gonna concentrate on finding my presentation so that I'm not. Yes. Hopefully in 1 second, you'll be able to see my presentation. I'm just waiting for a second. Right. Hopefully you can all see my screen. Could you let me know if that's correct, that you can see my screen there correctly and you can all hear me? Just tell me a yes, a quick yes would be good. Thank you, Elena. Thank you, Victoria, Galina. Brilliant. Excellent. Well, obviously, it's a real pleasure for me again to be here with you. I can see that people are from all over Ukraine, different parts of the country, which is great as well. By the way, I'm going to show straight away my slides, which I'm always very proud of. Here you can see that I have actually visited Ukraine. Some of you might even have met me in person. You can tell me if that's true in the chat box, if you've ever met me in person. I've done 3 trips to Ukraine. They were quite a long time ago, I have to confess, obviously, but I've been in Kiev, I've been in Donetsk, I've been in Odessa, I've been in Kharkiv, and also maybe you have also seen me in webinars. I was counting today that I have done 10 special unique webinars for Ukraine, which is actually the country that I've given talks to the most in webinars. So hopefully some of you have seen me before, either in person or in webinars. Today, what we're going to be doing is thinking about starting the new school year. Yesterday, literally, I arrived at my house at 1 a.m. I spent 2 weeks with my family, with my son and my daughter, and this cartoon makes me laugh. What I did on my summer vacation, and the teacher is saying this is too short, and I think that we would all agree, right, that the summer holidays are always too short. It always feels like they should be a little bit longer. Here we are already very close to September, and the aim of my session today is really sharing ideas which I use myself. You know, when you've had your holidays and you've kind of switched off from work, and then suddenly you come back to school and you've got this whole new year to prepare for. And I kind of have a checklist of things that I need to think about before I begin my teaching. And I will say from the beginning two things or a couple of things. The first thing is that what I'm going to say today, I'm sure they're things that you always do also. So I'm not trying to explain many things that are completely new to you, but they're the things that I kind of need to remember myself when I'm going to begin the school year, like sharing the way that I go about beginning this new school year. The other thing that I obviously must say is that, of course, I always feel a little bit embarrassed in the sense that I know that you guys are teaching in uniquely difficult situation. Um, I'm speaking as a teacher in a normal situation that has not been as difficult as you. So if I ever say something that is very stupid because you cannot do it or because you've got problems doing things, then I apologize before I even begin my session. Okay. Obviously, I think that you guys are in a unique situation and you're doing a uniquely brilliant job. So with all my humility, obviously, if I do say something that's a bit silly, then please forgive me. Let's begin then. So the question is, what do I do at the beginning of the school year? How do I go about preparing? Now, I believe you're about to start your classes very soon, probably next week. My school starts next week. There are certain things that I think that are very good to do before school begins, if it's possible. Sometimes it's not possible in my situation, and sometimes it is. But these are some things to think about. Obviously, again, many of the things that I'm saying are very obvious, but if you can, before you begin to teach next week, then obviously find out what groups you have, find out what ages your students are, find out what levels you're teaching, and obviously find out what books you'll be teaching. And I'll be coming back to that in a second. Obviously, knowing what book you're going to be teaching this year helps you to prepare your classes. And obviously, also, if you can find out anything special about the students. So, for example, in my school, we do have a way of working where we can find out, for example, if there are any students who have special needs, any students who have special difficulties, maybe students who have particular problems with their learning, particular problems with English. And obviously, the more you know about your classes before you begin the year, then the better you can prepare. And going back to this idea of going back to the books that you're going to be teaching, this sounds obvious, but I think sometimes we don't do it. Whatever book you're going to use, have a look at the introduction to the teacher's book and have a look also, of course, at the first unit. Now, of course, maybe you're using the same book that you used last year, in which case you know everything about it, but maybe you're beginning a new book that you've never used before. One thing that is interesting, I've been teaching for a long time. I can't remember how many years, it's that long, but I've been writing books for 30 years. And I know that publishers often worry because the teacher's book, people spend a lot of time preparing the teacher's book, and not everybody reads the teacher's book. Obviously, the more experienced you are, you often think that it's not necessary to read it. But my tip, and obviously today I'll be making lots of tips about beginning the school year, my first tip would be simply to read the teacher's book introduction. Now that sounds obvious, but I'm not sure if people usually do that or not. For example, so obviously the examples that I'm going to show today are all from Gateway to the World, the latest edition of the Gateway series. Victoria, you do that. I'm glad that you do it. Not everybody does, believe me. We've done like kind of investigation, and not everybody actually looks at the teacher's book. But if you, and I'm using Gateway to the World, by the way, as an example, whatever your book is, whatever publisher you're working with, it's the same, okay? My examples are from Gateway to the World because that's my book, but the same principle to any series that you're using. But have a look, and hopefully at the beginning of your teacher's book, there is some kind of introduction which explains, if you like, the philosophy of the book. I think any course book should have some kind of philosophy, some kind of guiding aim, guiding message. In the case of Gateway to the World, then we're talking about, for example, what makes a great learner or what makes a great thinker. And obviously, I'm not going to go through this teacher's book introduction, but whatever book you're using, in this case, where it says in the student's book, great learners, great thinkers in the middle, learn a little bit about what the book is trying to do. Learn a little bit about, as I say, the book's philosophy. And I do believe that that will help you to get the most out of the book and its special features. Why do we do it this way? Why do we do it that way? Why do we include, for example, in this case, real world content? So tip number one, have a look at the teacher's book introduction. Here you'll see another very important point. Find out what is available for you as a teacher. And I think that Ina, at the end of the session, will explain a little bit about all of the digital options that come with, for example, Gateway to the World. But I find as a teacher, a book is no longer just a book. When I began teaching, we just had a book with nothing else. Nowadays, we have lots of other resources, sometimes so many that we forget what is actually there. And I will tell you the truth, sometimes myself as a teacher and even as the author of the book, I tend to forget that, oh yeah, so there are these test generators, there are this type of test, that type of test, all the different things that you can do with the book. So if you like, homework before you begin the school year is just to have a look at that information so that you know what is there. Also, in the case of Gateway to the World, you've got some top tips from me. At each different level, there are some different ideas about how to teach, for example, in the case of Gateway to the World, visible thinking routines, flipped classroom videos, all those different elements in the book. Have a look through, have a read of them, and hopefully that will help to make it much easier to begin the school year with your book. Now, another top tip from me is to make sure that you students know the way around the book. So, for example, maybe you've been teaching the same book for 3 years, for 4 years, for 5 years, whatever. So you know the book really well. But the question is, your students are new to this particular book, right? They've never used it before. You have, but they haven't. So I've prepared this little test. Obviously, I think you'll be, this talk will be available to you. Maybe, I'm not sure, as PDFs or the recording of the talk. But this little quiz, okay, make it fun, make it like a race. As quickly as possible, who can find the answer to these 12 questions? And the students have to find out the information by looking through their new book. Now, for example, if anybody uses Gateway, can you put in the chat box, the first question there is, there are 9 units in the book. Is that true or false? If anybody uses Gateway, do you know if that's true or false? Whether it's the first edition, the second edition, or the new edition. True or false? Can you just tell me in the chat box? It's false. Somebody says it's true. Victoria says it's true. And Natalia has given the correct answer, 10 units. Although in 1 second, I'm going to show to you that actually it's not 10, it's 11 for you people in Ukraine. You're very special. Yes, somebody, Marina, you're right. You're very special. You're the only people in the whole of the world who have 11 units in Gateway to the World. I'll explain that in a second. Question number 2. There is a grammar reference section at the end of each unit. Is that true or false? In the chat box, true or false? Yes, Alina, you're right. Natalia, true, it is true, it is true. Now, for example, that's just a simple question, right? And you know that the grammar reference section in Gateway is at the end of each unit, but in many books, it's at the end of the book. So again, I'm going to repeat myself. It doesn't matter what book you're using, what series or what publisher. Prepare your own. If you're using a different book, prepare a different quiz with different questions, similar questions. And the reason is that, as I said before, you know the book very well, maybe, but your students are new to the book. Maybe they used the previous level, maybe they didn't. But these types of quizzes are helping the students to find their way, to know where things are, to know what different features the book has, and that is really going to help them to make the most of the book. I just want to go to that point about how many units, because some of you are right. I think all of us at Macmillan feel very, very, very proud of the special edition that we have made for Ukraine of Gateway to the World. Gateway is used completely around the world. You in Ukraine are the only country in the world to have unit number 11. And it's something I teach in Spain, by the way. If you didn't know, I am a teacher in Spain and I visit Spanish schools. And obviously in some Spanish schools, there are Ukrainian students. And I show them these pages, and I think we're all very, very proud of them. It's a way of making Gateway particularly relevant to your country, sharing Ukrainian culture. You can see obviously the pictures all specially designed, beautiful pages about Ukrainian sports people, Ukrainian food. And this is a very special edition that we've created for you. And I think that it is a very significant edition that we have made, one that I personally am very proud of. So we've got the same format for the other units within Gateway, but we have a special focus on, as I say, Ukrainian culture. Okay, so we've got 11 units in Gateway to the World for Ukraine. And we also, another thing that's in the introduction of the teacher's book is something that I'm going to talk about now in a little bit more detail, is this idea of inclusion. Would you say, and you can just tell me yes or no, do you have mixed level classes? Do you have students who have different levels of English all together in the same class? Valentina has said straight away, yes, yes. I mean, and yes, you said, of course, Olena, and I agree with you totally, of course. I would say that one of the most difficult things about being a teacher of teenagers or of any large groups of students, because I imagine, and you can tell me in the chat box if this is true, I teach groups of about 20. How many students do you usually have per class? Would it be similar? Would it be more? Would it be less? Just tell me in the chat box. That would be really useful to know. How many students per class? 16, 7 to 10, 15, 27. Right. I mean, I would say that even with a class of, for example, 10, even with a class of 5, mixed ability always makes the life of a teacher a little bit complicated, right? Because basically, some students are understanding things immediately and some students are having difficulties. On these 2 pages in the teacher's book introduction, we have different suggestions about how to work with mixed ability. And you'll see that on the right-hand side of the screen, we've got how to increase the level of challenge and how to increase the level of support. In other words, we've got the difficult thing with teaching mixed abilities is that some students need extra help and some students need extra material. The suggestion, of course, within Gateway to the World, one of the suggestions of working with this, one of them is what we call Reach Higher, where the faster students, the ones who finish activities very quickly, they have an extra activity. So, for example, maybe some of you are already using this. Vocabulary pages, grammar pages, reading pages, we have at the end of the page, we've got this little sign which says there, Reach Higher. And that's sending them to a page at the back of the book where they have an extra activity to keep the faster students busy, motivated, interested, and active. In this case, it's one of those exercises that we call the odd man out or the odd word out. So when the rest of the students are finishing their normal activities on the page within the unit, the faster students can do an extra activity, which is maybe a little bit more challenging, maybe also a little bit fun, and also keeping them occupied. Let's do this for a second, okay? This is always fun to play games with you teachers too. Which word does not belong in the group, and write a sentence explaining why? You don't have to write a sentence explaining why, but which one would be different in number one? We've got number one, starter, packed lunch, dessert, and main course. Which one is different? Which one is the one that's different? Packed lunch, okay? Could somebody, like in a word or 2 words or 5 words, explain why that is different? Packed lunch is definitely the one that's wrong, right? Why is it the one that's different? And that's, of course, keeping the students busy, right? While they explain why. It's not a course. Olga, thank you. That's a very good answer. It's not a course. So obviously we could have starter, then the main course, and the dessert. That's also a very good explanation, Victoria. And it's also interesting that we can have different explanations. So Victoria is saying not served in the restaurants. That would be a nice way of explaining it too. And so we've got a certain amount of sort of, if you like, not creativity exactly, but we've got wide variety of different possible answers. What about number 2? Pea, spinach, plum, carrot. The odd one out is plum, obviously, Victoria. Actually, Victoria, did you know that obviously in England there is a thing called the Victoria plum? So that's very good that you got the answer there. Victoria plum. That makes me smile. Why is it different? Yes, it's true. It's called the Victoria plum. Google it. It's a very typical type of plum in the UK. Plum is a fruit, right? Plum is a fruit, and the rest are types of vegetable, right? Exactly, the rest are vegetables. Thank you, Natalia. Okay, so basically the idea is that we're giving the students, the fast finishers, a task. They've got something to do while the rest of the class finish. People always ask me, they say, yeah, but shouldn't everybody do this exercise? Well, that's fine. What you could do is the students who finished faster have already done this activity, and the other students could simply do this for homework. And that way, everybody does the same work, but obviously in class, you're keeping the faster finishers occupied, busy, and hopefully happy. So, very simple idea. It's particularly useful, I believe, it's particularly useful for reading, because obviously with reading, some people, I always find this, some of my students are very fast readers and some take a lot longer. What we can do is we can give the fast finishers an extra activity at the end of the book. We're checking more comprehension. And of course, as I just said, you could ask the slower students to do this exercise for homework if that's what you feel happier doing. So, Reach Higher, it's just a way of keeping students occupied. If you're using a different course book, then you could prepare something yourself You could look for extra materials, you could look for a photocopy, and you could do the same thing. Another idea which I'm particularly fond of now is that if in your school your students are allowed to use mobile phones or allowed to use laptops or tablets, when a student has finished an activity like a reading activity, what I ask them to do is to Google the people, the places, the concepts, the ideas in the reading text and see what more they can find out about the people, places, concepts in the text. And this is a great way of keeping those students occupied and also of making the students realize that these are real world texts about real people. They're learning about concepts that are interesting and useful in the outside world. So I think that you're doing like two very useful things at the same time. Keeping fast finishers busy by Googling for more information and maybe afterwards sharing that information. And meanwhile, you're proving that the people and the places in your texts are absolutely real. So that's another concept, simply Googling for more information from the text. Okay, so let's go back again. Different things that you need to know before your classes begin. Victoria, that's good. I'm glad that you like that. Yeah. If you can use the, it depends. We will come back to this about questions about what are the norms in your class. But if your students can use, for example, laptops, smartphones, then it is a nice way of getting them to be more active in the class, finding out more. Okay, more things before the class starts. I believe, and maybe you can help me again in the chat box because this is what I believe. Maybe some of you are still teaching online. Maybe it depends on what area of the country you're in. If you are teaching online, obviously what you might need to do before the year begins is find out what platform you're using. You might need to register yourself, register your students' details. One thing that I can tell you, where I teach here in Spain, my school, we seem to change platform every year. I think it's usually a question, an economic question, that platforms become cheaper or more expensive. So, for example, myself, every year, I have to kind of learn what are we using this year? What are we using in terms of video conferencing? Or what are we using even just in terms of online registering, keeping a track of the students' progress? So at the start of each year, personally, I have to check, so what are we using this year? What do I need to know about this platform, etc., etc. So for example, just an example, in the last few years, we've been using Google Teams, but we've also been using Zoom for conferencing, and we've also been using Microsoft. So find out what exactly are you using. And obviously, the more you know about the platform that you're using, then I personally, maybe because I'm slightly older, but I find that knowing more about what I'm using, what platform I'm using, then I feel more confident before the year begins. There might also be some special online norms, for example, using camera, not using camera, etc., etc. Protocol, if you like. And I personally, again, think that this is something that's really useful to know about before the school year begins. What exactly are you using and what exactly are the students expected to use? Right, Zoom. A lot of Zoom fans here. Actually, I also am a Zoom fan. But as I say, the problem for teachers, in my experience, is that we don't necessarily have the ability to choose what we use. And what happens to me is that I become very happy and confident using one particular platform. And then suddenly the next year, I am forced to change. And so I need to personally to start feeling confident by playing about with the new platform. Now, let's imagine, for example, you're teaching face-to-face. Obviously, a great thing to do before you begin the school year. It's nice to know Will you be always teaching in the same classroom? Will you be moving from class to class? What equipment do you have in the classroom? What facilities do you have? Maybe there are no facilities. Maybe it's a simple blackboard and chairs, but whatever you have, I always find that it's good to know whatever you have before you begin. Now, this again, one thing about teaching teenagers is that you often have, at the beginning of secondary school, you have students who have moved from secondary school to primary, from primary to secondary, sorry. You also have maybe students who've moved school from one school area to a different school area. This is an obvious point, but do students know their way around the school? Do they know where everything is? Do they know where the different classrooms are? Where, for example, the staff room is, where the toilets are? One simple way to do this, I find that I love doing this. So in secondary schools in Spain, the first year, those students who are new to the school, I get them to draw a plan of the school and to label everything. So on each floor, where is the staff room? Where is this classroom? Where is their classroom? And they draw the plan and they label it, of course, in English. And of course, that's great use of functional vocabulary in English. Do they know the names of the different rooms in a school? Canteen, for example, computer room, gym. Do they know all of those words in English? So a really nice activity on the first day or the first week of lessons is to get students to draw that school plan. Another thing is, and I think this is really important, maybe you're beginning to work in a new school, maybe you're new to teaching. The very first thing I think that is useful to know is, do you know all of the norms and the rules for the school where you work? And obviously, we need to know the norms for teachers and the norms for students. And I must admit, again, I've been teaching in the same school for 25 years, and I've been there for 25 years, but each year it seems that we have new regulations, new rules, both for the teachers and for the students. And so obviously at the beginning of a new school year, it's really important to check that you know if there's anything which is new. Are there any new school rules? Obviously also, and again, I think this is very interesting in different schools, in different areas and in different countries. Maybe there are lots of rules that you have to follow, and maybe there are no rules. If there are no rules, then in a way that's, I don't know, is it better or worse? Basically, you have to decide for yourself what are the rules that you want in your class. So, for example, what are you going to do if students arrive late? What are you going to do if a student doesn't bring their homework? What are you going to do if the students forget to bring their materials or they never bring their materials? What are you going to do? This is a silly thing, but what are you going to do about chewing gum? For example, in my school, some teachers allow chewing gum, some students don't allow chewing gum. And I think that if it's at the beginning of the school year, personally, I think it's really useful for you to decide, what is it that you want to happen in your classroom? What are the rules that you want to follow? And it's much better if you know what your rules are before you begin, instead of making up the rules as the year continues. One question could be, at the beginning of the year, do you want to negotiate any rules with the students? Some teachers like creating the rules with the class. So together you decide what will happen if students misbehave, what will happen if students do this, do that, what will happen if students don't bring homework. So you could maybe negotiate, but you may decide that you don't want to negotiate. These are all questions for each teacher to decide, but my point would be that you should be clear before the school year begins. you should be clear about what you want to happen in your classroom. And if you have particular school rules about handing in homework, not handing in homework, then how and when will you get students to know about your rules? Because I've been teaching for such a long time, like I think about 37 years, I think it's interesting that we as teachers think that all of us have the same rules and the same way of thinking about the regulations in the classroom. But what I've discovered after so many years of teaching is that we all have different ideas and different ways of working. And I think that that's fine. The only thing is making sure that how do the students know what you want rather than a different teacher? How are you going to make that known? Just as a little bit of a break, this is a list of essential classrooms to always remember. I'm going to read them to you. I think that you'll probably agree that they're pretty standard things. I will not throw things in class. I will not be rude. I will not shout. I will not curse. I will not be mean to others. I will not have temper tantrums. I will not leave the classroom without permission. I will not do these things because I cannot do them. I am the teacher. Okay, you can tell me in the chat box if that makes you laugh or not. Personally, I think that's very funny. The first time I read that, I was convinced that this was a tip for the students, but I find that quite funny, especially the idea of I will not have temper tantrums, because sometimes as teachers, when we start going a little bit a little bit mad because of misbehavior, we also have temper tantrums, right? But yes, just to remind you that obviously you shouldn't. Yeah, not raising your voice. Yes, I suppose that's true, actually. Yes, not raising your voice. Is that good or bad? Yeah. Okay, so those are some things to think about before you begin your school year. More things to think about. Talking now particularly about being an English teacher, maybe you have some special ways of working that they need to know about. So I'm going to explain something about vocabulary. I have a very special actually, Victoria, that's an interesting question. But obviously, maybe you know, no, I will, actually will is to do with volition of wanting, yeah? So will is often used to actually mean that you will do something because you are willing. That's actually where the word willing comes from, right? When you will. But yeah, that's an interesting point. Yeah, the use of will there. Okay, I'm going to explain something. This is just so that you know how I teach vocabulary to my classes. Basically, and I'm giving this example. You might have a different way of working with vocabulary, but basically this is what I do in the first week. With each new class, if I've never taught a group before, I explain my way of working. My way of working is that I take lots of these pieces of paper. So I cut these up, okay? Little pieces of paper. This is what I do, just so that you know. Lots of pieces of paper. And each time I teach a new word that I want my students to remember, that's important because maybe you don't want your students to remember the words. But if I teach a word that I want my students to remember, I write it down, okay? Like this, for example, I've got some words. This is my writing. It's not actually very good handwriting, okay? This is for an advanced level class, a C1 class. Each time I teach some new vocabulary, I write it down on a card. When I write it down on a card, it means that I want my students to remember it. That means that they should write it down in a vocabulary list. And so I tell my students at the beginning of the year to write down, to have a section in their notebook or in their folder where they only write down new vocabulary. They write it down in a list because from time to time we will have vocabulary tests, which will test the words that I have written down. Now, this is just a simple procedure so that all of the vocabulary for the students is in the same place. And so when they need to revise the vocabulary, they don't look for it in 6 different places, for example, in their student's book on a piece of paper here, on a piece of paper there. All of the vocabulary is together, and it makes life much easier for them to revise, and obviously much easier for me to check that they're writing the vocabulary down. Now, again, the point that I'm trying to make is whatever you want to happen in this new school year, if you can explain it to your students at the beginning of the year, you're going to make life much easier for yourself and for your students. Maybe you have a particular procedure for teaching or learning grammar. For example, I get my students to write down my grammar explanations from the blackboard in the same place in their notebook, so that all of that grammar information is in the same place. And also, I have a very special way of dealing with correcting written work. So, for example, I tell my students at the beginning of the year that each time I correct their essays, I want them to write down any mistakes in these 3 columns. And I do this throughout the year, basically because I have discovered that I think I spend a lot of time correcting writing, and students often only look at the final mark, but they don't actually write down like their mistakes, and they don't learn their mistakes. And that means that each time we do an essay, they make the same mistakes. So I find it useful to write down these essay mistakes in the 3 columns of mistake, correction, explanation. So, for example, my students in Spanish, you can tell me if this is similar for Ukrainian students. But for example, in Spanish, they always make the mistake people is. So they say people is funny. They forget that people is an irregular plural. So they write down the mistake, they write down the correction, and they write down, in this case, the explanation, which is people in English is plural, 1 person, 2 people. And throughout the year, they keep on adding to these lists, and they keep on adding to the lists. And from time to time, I will check that they remember the mistake. I will write the mistake, for example, on the blackboard, and they have to tell me what the correction is and what the explanation is. And again, if they have a notebook, if they have a folder, I get them to do this always in the same place. I think that otherwise, when you correct mistakes in essays, students often really don't look at them. They just look if it was a 7 out of 10, if it was a 9 out of 10, if it was a 10 out of 10. But that is not really the question. The question is, as I explained to my students, that we learn from our mistakes, but we only learn from them if we work on them, right? Simply making the mistake and then making the mistake again doesn't help. I'm just going to go back for 1 second to Victoria's point about that you have a vocabulary and grammar reference in the book, right? For example, there is a vocabulary list. That is a very good point. One thing that I've discovered is that, and I'm sure the same thing happens to you, I often find that I'm teaching words that are not even in the book, because there are things that happen. A student needs a useful word, and I find that I've taught it, and I want them to remember it. So most of the vocabulary is in the book, but it is also true that there are some words that appear in class that I also want them to remember. That's why, personally, I do the separate vocabulary list. I also believe that writing down the words themselves helps them also in a way to memorize the words. Yeah, so there's a question from Olga about tips to get students to write vocabulary lists when they study online. I will say one thing, which is not very modern. It's a little bit old-fashioned, but I've said a few times, I actually do vocabulary tests quite frequently. And I know that vocabulary tests could sound a little bit old-fashioned, but I find that the only way that students really remember words is if they go back and actually do learn them, as we say in English, by heart. And so I do actually really do encourage them to kind of study. And I do think actually the way that I learned, I studied French and Spanish, at school and then at university. Personally, I think that like memorizing vocabulary lists, it's not very exciting and it's not very modern, but I actually believe that it really does help students to learn words. So again, maybe I'm just getting old, but I do believe that a certain amount of memorization, it's funny, isn't it? I always find this as teachers, that students often, they're used to learning things by heart in history lessons and in chemistry and physics. But it's as if in English we never kind of learn things by reading them again and again and by studying them. And personally, I think it's actually a good idea. But obviously, everybody is free to disagree with me if you like. Right, right. So there's another question here that I've got for you to think about when you begin your class. Think about where and how the students will be seated. For example, can you decide where they sit, or is it the tutor who decides where they sit? Do you want to decide where they sit? Can you tell me in the chat box, for example, what do you do about seating? Do you choose who sits next to each other, or do you allow the students to choose their partner? Can you just let me know? I'm interested to know the answer to that. Do you choose, or do they choose? Or does somebody else choose? They choose. 50-50, they choose. They choose. Right. Student choose. And so we've got, right, okay, we've got different opinions and different ways of working. I'll tell you what I do. My philosophy is that I allow them to choose, and I explain to them at the beginning of the year. I think it's nice, right, if they can choose who they sit next to. But I do explain to them at the beginning of the year that I will let them choose who they sit next to. But if I find that there is a problem, then I will, for example, separate students if I have a good reason to separate. Right, Vila, that is exactly what I've just said. So we coincide. We've said the same thing at the same time. So again, I make that clear to them at the beginning of the year. So yes, you can decide who you sit next to, but if I, for some reason, think that it's not working, then I will change the seating. But again, I think it's very, very good for you as a teacher to decide before you walk into the classroom, what are you going to do? And how are you going to explain it to them? So you might be, exactly as we've said, you might be happy to let them choose where to sit. But if there are problems, as some of you have mentioned, yeah, then I will make my own decision. I think the message that I'm trying to make throughout the talk is that the clearer you are about what you want and what about you're happy with, as long as you know before the school year begins what you want and why and how, then everything goes much, much smoother. Right. A few other tips. So I'm keeping on making tips here about the beginning of the school year. I think what can be very useful is to plan the first week or two without books. Again, it depends very much on your situation. In my situation, most of the students buy the books in shops. Some of them come with the books in the first week or 2 weeks, and some of them don't bring books. So I think that maybe you could photocopy a page of the book if that's possible for you. But I always find that it's a very good idea to plan a few things without books. And that way you are ready for any situation. And in the first week or 2 weeks, I tend to spend a lot of time doing getting to know you activities, maybe, for example, a few language games. And that's especially so that I can find out more about their particular level. So, for example, one of the first things that I do at the beginning of the year, maybe the first day, is check that students know the necessary functional language for the classroom. So, for example, do they know the names of things in the classroom? Obviously, in books like Gateway, this is the first page of Gateway to the World 2. We've got the typical vocabulary exercise, checking that the students know words for things like pencil case, pencil sharpener, whiteboard, rubber, board rubber, all the basics, okay? This is obviously for low-level students, just checking that they can name the things. If we want the lesson to be in English, then we need to know that the immediate environment that the students are in, they can name things in English. And I like this competition. I often do this with low-level students at the beginning of the year, that we go student by student. They take it in turns. They have to point to something in the classroom and name it in English. And obviously, if there are things that are in the classroom that they can't name, that is the moment for you to teach it. But obviously, we simply go around and how many different things in your classroom can they name, and can they name it correctly in English? Obviously, with higher level students, you don't need to do this. But with, for example, A1 plus, A2, sometimes even B1, it's good just to check that the students know the words for all the things around them that appear in English. I think one thing that's important to remember is at the beginning of the school year, students sometimes feel a little bit worried, a little bit anxious, a little bit nervous, right? Actually, to tell you the truth, and you can tell me in the chat box if you're like me, I actually, after 37 years, I still feel sometimes a little bit nervous on day one of teaching because I don't know the students. I don't know what they're going to be like. I don't know if they're going to be friendly to me, if they're going to be nice. Yeah, Natalia, you feel the same. Could people very quickly yeah, agree. It's funny because it doesn't matter if you've been teaching for 2 years, 10 years, 20 years. I think that the first day when you're beginning to get to know your new students, it can be a little bit nervous. And of course, when you think that if you feel nervous, imagine how your students feel. So we often talk about social and emotional learning. I think it's very useful to try to help students to feel positive about the new year and to express their worries. So for example, let's do number one, okay? This is new kid at school, advice from past students. And let's do a little bit of English language work, okay? We've got number one. I was worried about friends, but you just need remember. So what is the answer for number one? I was worried about, is it make, to make, making? Natalia said straight away, making, of course, it's the gerund, right? So I was worried about making friends, but you just need, what comes number two? You just need to remember. Thank you very much, Olga. Very fast there to remember. Now, obviously, this is easy for you. This is practicing gerunds and infinitives. And we're doing two things at the same time, right? We're doing a grammar exercise, but we're also talking about potential fears of students when they begin a new year. So, for example, I'm going to give you the answers for, obviously, for number two. I was afraid of getting lost in my new school, but now it's funny to think that the person that I met, the person who has become my best friend, when we both got lost. So these are different situations of people beginning a new school and talking about their fears or their advice about how to function successfully in the first weeks of a new school or of a new term. So this is a nice activity. It's at the beginning of Gateway to the World B2. We're practicing gerunds and infinitives, but we're also getting students to think about good advice to feel more confident at the beginning of the year. And that you can see that the grammar exercise is followed by exercise 4B. What do you think of the advice? Can you think of any other advice for someone starting at a new school or a new stage of their academic life? So I think this is nice. And often in Gateway to the World, I have tried to do this. I've tried to combine grammar or vocabulary, but the content is also very important. The content in this case is getting the students to feel good, feel more confident about beginning a new school year. This is an activity that I particularly like. It's called Compass Points. It appears in the Great Learners, Great Thinker sections of Gateway to the World. It's called Compass Points because it's east, west, north, and south. E for is excitement. So the question here, number 5, think about how you can improve your English this year. Okay, this is for our students to discuss. Set goals using the compass points. E is for excitement. What excites you about learning English this year? Okay, so you're getting your students to discuss this. W, worries. What worries you about starting English this year? N is for needs. What do you need to know to learn English better this year? And S is for steps. What steps are you going to take to learn more English? And this is just a great way for students to talk about what excites them, what worries them, what they're going to do, how they are going to approach English lessons this year, and how they are going to learn more. And of course, your job here is to listen to the students, listen to their excitements, listen to their worries, and then give them advice about how they can learn English better according to their answers. Now, of course, and this is more or less my last section, my last big section in this talk, is the best beginning to the year, I believe, is getting students to feel comfortable about being one, about being together, about working as a group. So team dynamics is really the secret. We said before that many of us as teachers feel nervous about starting a new year with a new group. The best way to do this is to break the ice. And here are some ideas about how you can break the ice next week with your new students. This is a very simple idea. We give them different answers. You can think of lots of different ways of doing this, lots of different answers. I give the answer and the students have to think of the question. Some of them are very easy and almost like there is only one possibility. Some of them are more open. So for example, obviously question number 1, I'm from Woolton. What was the question? So this is what you do with your students, right? You give them the answer and get them to decide what was the question. What was the question in number 1? Very easy, number 1, right? Where are you from? Okay. By the way, I am from Woolton, which is in Liverpool, and I was in Woolton like 2 weeks ago. My mother still lives in Woolton. Okay. What do you think is a good question for number 2? Bacon and eggs. What would be a good question there? There's more than one answer here, of course, or more than one question, sorry. You can think of different questions, I imagine. What do you like to eat for breakfast? I think that's the obvious question. But Irina, that is also a very good question. And there is no right or wrong question here, right? What do you avoid eating? That could be the perfect question. Artur, LFC forever. I'm with you. I'm with you. I'm with you. Yes, what do you like? What did you eat? Yeah, the question would be, what did you eat this morning? So we can see, right? I want to make this clear. I want to make it clear that there are lots of different questions that we could ask. And that's why the exercise is interesting, because different students could come up with different questions. Now, obviously, number 3, yes, I can, and I can play the guitar. One question would be, for example, can you play the piano, for example, right? Number 4 could be who's your favorite singer, or it could be which singer do you hate? Lots of different possibilities. On a beach in the Caribbean, for example, question number 5, where would you like to be right now? Yeah. And number 6, you can see that number 6, maybe could somebody give me a good question for number 6? Because there are millions of possibilities, okay, for question number 6. Anybody got a question for number 6? Do you have a rest? That's a good question, Victoria. Yes, sometimes, not often, not often. Right. Are you a happy person? That is a very good question too. Thank you, Natalia. So let me explain. Day 1, you write the answers on the board. You get the students, for example, maybe in pairs to write questions. And then, of course, you get the students to interview each other and ask each other these questions. A great way to break the ice, a great way also to discover how good the students are at writing questions in English. So you're learning about the level of the students as you do the activity. Okay, I'm seeing some great questions in the chat box. Thank you very much, as always, for your amazing participation. Thank you. Now, here's another activity. I think some of you know that this is, I often do this exercise because it's one of my favorites. You tell your students that they can ask you any question at all, and the only rule is that my answer must always be yes. So, for example, if my students asked me, "Are you Spanish?" my answer would be no, so they would not get a point. So this is a great way for the students to learn about you. Okay, so the students are going to ask you lots of questions. They're going to enjoy it. They're going to discover more about you, and you can also discover something about them. Would anybody like to ask me a question? But your question must get the answer yes. If the answer is yes, are you a man? Irina, yes, I am. I think. I'm pretty sure that's the correct answer. But that was a very good question. Have you been in Salisbury? Do you know what, Mary? I have never been to Salisbury. So unfortunately, I'm embarrassed to say that I have yes, I believe it's a very beautiful place. Am I married? Yes, I am, Nadia. We're going to come to that in a second. That is a good question. I am married. Do you like summer? Yes, I do. Do I drink coffee? Yes, I do. Am I wearing a blue shirt? Yes, I am. Am I a football fan, Arturo? Yes, I am. Do I speak English? Yes. Can you drive? Valentina, you'll be surprised to know that the answer to your question, Valentina, is no. That is amazing, isn't it? I know. I'm very embarrassed about that, but like, no, I can't. Am I the author of Gateway? Yes, I am. Right. So imagine doing this with your class. It's great fun. The answer is always yes, which is good. So they can't ask questions like, "Are you stupid?" because they will lose a point. So it's a great icebreaker. So try this next week, okay? Next week, get them to do this activity. Marina, how did you know that I like the Beatles? I'm from Liverpool, of course, so yes, I do like the Beatles. I love the Beatles, okay? Do I like the webinar that we're doing now, Victoria? I'm loving it. So the answer is yes, yes, yes. Okay, it's a great activity. Alexander, I hope to think that I'm a kind person. I don't know if somebody would disagree, but I'm going to say yes. Okay, cool. We're going to do one more activity, I think. One more activity because we're coming to the end of the session, unfortunately. One of my favorite icebreakers at the beginning of the school year is the activity where you write sentences, for example, 5 sentences. They could be about the summer holidays. They could be about your life in general. And some of the sentences are true and some of the sentences are not true. And the students write their sentences, they share their sentences with a partner, and the partner has to guess what is true or what is not true. So as I say, if the students already know each other, they could simply do the summer holidays because this is a great moment for them to share what they did. I've got 4 sentences on the screen. One of them is not true. I want you to guess very quickly, which one do you think is not true? You think number 2 is not true. Somebody thinks number 3 is not true. Somebody thinks number 2 is not true. Number 4. Number 2. Does anybody think that number 5 is not true? So Marina thinks number 5 is not true. Yulia as well. Ludmila as well also thinks 5. Victoria thinks true. Okay, well, this is a great activity, okay? So you understand how the activity works with your students. Some students could be, some sentences could be true. Some of them are not true. And what we do is we get the students to guess. The students write their own sentences. Would you like me to tell you which one is not true? I'm going to tell you now, Irina. I'll tell you. Right. Number 1 is true. So I was in Cairo last February and I had an amazing birthday in Cairo. Number 2 is completely true. It was about 10 years ago now, or maybe a little bit more. There is an indoor ski slope. And unfortunately, I had quite a bad accident and it was 40 degrees outside skiing. So that was a bit embarrassing. Number 3 is actually true. Number 3 is true. So tomorrow is my 37th wedding anniversary. Okay, I will have been married for 37 years. Thank you for the congratulations, Natalia. Number 4 is definitely not true. Okay, so number 4 is completely false. I hate DIY. I hate doing any home improvement. And my wife knows this after 37 years, that I am terrible at it and I hate doing it. But number 5 is true. Would you like to see a photograph to prove that it is true that I once gave a talk in the Tarashevenko University? Here's my photo. And here I am. I was just a young boy. Irina, you're right. You're right. That I actually asked specially to have tomorrow free. Okay. And there I am. This was in 2011, a long time ago, but hopefully I will be back again one day to do the same. Okay, I had a few more activities to do, but I think that I don't want to keep you. We've been talking together for how can 3 be true? I understand what you're saying. Yeah, unfortunately, well, my wife understands that. Yeah, she understands. Okay, I'm gonna jump a little bit. Okay, forgive me for jumping. One last activity. I'm going to give you one last activity. What I do is I draw 3 rectangles. So this is a day 1 activity. I draw 3 rectangles, 3 rectangles on the board, and I simply ask my students to draw 3 photographs of their summer holidays. So obviously, lots of people take photographs on their smartphones. I get my students to draw 3 pictures of 3 moments in their summer holidays. Now, obviously, some students are very bad at drawing, and that actually makes it a very funny activity, because sometimes the pictures are very bad, and also because they're not very good photographs, it means there is more speculation, because maybe it's not totally clear what the picture is illustrating. But I find this is a really fun activity to do in the first week. 3 rectangles, empty rectangles. They could be horizontal or they could be vertical. The students draw 3 moments from the summer holidays. They swap pieces of paper with their partner, and then they speculate about what they think their partner did and what the photographs are demonstrating. So that can always be a nice activity to do, particularly straight after the summer holidays, so that we're sharing information. And as I said a few times, what we're really doing is breaking the ice. And I think it's very, very important in terms of classroom dynamics at the beginning of the school year. What you want is to create a good, understanding, kind, positive, constructive atmosphere between you and between the students in your class. By the way, I'll come to this in a second, but obviously if you follow me on Facebook, and if you don't, then I'll give you the address now. I will be sharing some more of my favorite day 1 activities, the activities that I do each year at the beginning of my school year. Right, this is a funny cartoon to finish with. I began with a cartoon. Miss Finch, my attorney, has advised me that I'm not obligated to address the question of what I did on my summer vacation. Nonetheless, I would like to respond. Okay, I don't know whether we have time just for some very last questions before I finish. Does anybody have anything that they are really burning to ask me? If we don't have time for me to answer your questions now, as I say, I will share, in fact, I'll share it now. This is the Facebook page where you can always contact me. By the way, I think Ukraine is probably the country where I have most followers, which is very nice for me to know. I'm very proud of that. If you're not already following the Facebook page, then please do join me, and you can always contact me directly there. And it's always a pleasure if you have any questions, any comments, and I will be sharing some more day 1 activities very, very soon. As always, it's been a real pleasure to be with you and to share some ideas. I see that Ina is back with us in the room.
I must confess that in the very beginning, Dave was worried whether his ideas will be relevant. They are, I believe. I had much pleasure watching your talk, and I see and you see the participants find all the ideas you share really inspiring and really useful. And I believe next Monday they will try some of them, or at least one of them, with their students.
That's exactly what I would like. Yeah, try it. Try one. Yeah, just one. Try one, see how it goes. You might want to adapt my ideas and make them work specially for you. But yeah, give it a go and see if something works. And yeah, that's definitely my goal today.
There is one more very important thing we should do before we say goodbye to each other. We do have the opportunity to make you more familiar with the course Gateway to the World. And I am launching a conference poll, and I kindly ask you to take part in it.
Oh yeah, of course.
Just a second. So on your screens now, I hope you see this one simple question. If you would like to have a closer look and get more familiar with the course Gateway to the World, which again, I would stress that this course is very particular, very specific, and the only one in the whole world because it is tailored for Ukrainian teachers and Ukrainian realia. If you wouldn't like to get familiar with it, just press no, it's okay. If you don't work with the teenagers, then this is your option. And I see that there are lots of participants who are already working with Gateway to the World. And by pressing yes, you get the opportunity to see all the possibilities, all the opportunities which you will have with this course. And it's not only paper version, small teaser. Among digital resources, there is an option through which we can reduce cheating to 0. This is like a teaser to those of you who would like to get to know this course more closely. So I see that the participants are still voting. While you are taking part in the poll, I would like to remind once again that this session is being recorded. So as soon as it is ready, you will be able to get this recording. And also every participant who was today online will get the certificate, but it will not happen today. It might happen tomorrow if I have no more power cuts. I see that still the participants are voting, so I won't close it. Lots of thanks in the chat box. The question from Irina, is it possible to prevent cheating? Irina, put your belief in Macmillan education team. They managed to create one thing, one very specific thing, and it is present by now only in the course Gateway to the World. And it is possible that your learners will not cheat when they are doing their home assignments. They made it possible. I hope you understand that the problem of cheating is not specifically Ukrainian problem. It's all over the world.
Definitely. As a teacher of teenagers in Spain, I can tell you that it's very, very common.
Okay, Katerina, don't worry, you will receive the whole recording of the session. And I see several participants are typing about the problems of working online with these power cutouts. Again, one more teaser, this digital offer of this course allows you to have it without the internet and without electricity. I mean, there is an option that you do have the digital components available without electricity and without the internet. Yes, that's true. I think that all the participants who wanted to take the poll did it, so I end it. Thank you very much to each and every participant of our today's Day 2 conference. And special thanks to Dave. You every time you're giving the talks to Ukrainian teachers, you manage to be very peculiar and very special for our teachers. So thank you very much. Lots of ideas, lots of inspirations. Take care, everybody, and hope to see you at our next events.
Thanks so much to everybody for coming along. Yeah, especially in difficult circumstances. Thanks for all the lovely comments. And yeah, I hope to meet you in person one day. I'm going to believe that that's going to be possible.
Take care and stay safe. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.